Go ahead.
Okay.
Start again.
So the EULA process is mandatory. Um, the city has to work with community boards, and they want to be seen as cooperative and providing all of the information. They provide all of the information that they need to because that would be the basis for a lawsuit. We were not provided all the information, but they're required to provide baseline information by the city charter. So the city planning department is very careful about being nice and looking cooperative, having many dialogues, many discussions, providing as much information as they're requested or that they can, and but that's all part of the process of going through the land use review procedure. The other thing that is they're very obscure about is the environmental review process. So every major land use change requires an environmental review and the production of an environmental analysis or a full-blown environmental impact statement. These environmental impact statements can be 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 pages long, very complicated, very technical. Community boards don't have the professional capacity to analyze them, to consider them seriously. And the city doesn't provide that kind of interpretation.
Okay, so that's another thing. But I guess my question back to like this question of community participation is, my understanding, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, is that that a community or a community board can gum up the works of rezoning. They can make perhaps even halt the rezoning if they refuse to play ball. Is that? And can you repeat that in your answer?
Yeah. Well, theoretically, community boards can, or in practice, community boards can stop the rezoning process. But there are very few examples I can give you.
Okay,
well, how could they do it? They entering into conversations and negotiations with the city planning department usually produces minor changes at the edges. If it involves changes that do not threaten the interest of major property owners, they can get made. And they do get made. They play ball with community boards that way. And people on the land use committees of the community boards can feel that they're being recognized because they get some of their concerns are being affected. The city planning department uses downzoning, contextual zoning. This is rezoning an area to protect it. They use that to buy goodwill with homeowners and with residents who are concerned about major new speculative development. And so the other thing that the city planning department does is when they go in and they want to rezone and upzone an area in order to give the developer something, they'll also do a corresponding downzoning and say, well, look, we're going to protect your side streets, your brownstones. We're going to protect your homeowners. And this creates a certain amount of goodwill. And the city planning department says, well, listen, if you want these protections, though, you're going to have to take this other zoning, which is upzoning an area that is ripe for redevelopment, that the speculators are interested in, speculators have bought into. So they give this impression of being balanced. Oh, we're preserving, but we're also promoting development.
Okay.
And it's not balanced because the big speculators aren't interested in taking the brownstone blocks. They go in and they buy up the properties and then they redevelop them, but they're not interested in demolishing brownstone blocks. Take, for example, Park Slope. They were one of the first neighborhoods in Brooklyn, in New York City, to have contextual zoning to protect the brownstone side streets. But then what did the city planning department do? They went down 4th Avenue, which is a major wide avenue with a large Latino population, low-income Latino population, and they rezoned it with a vengeance in order to promote new high-rise luxury development. And that's what's happening right now.
But back to my question, because you kind of half answered it, like, I was asking how, if it's true that community boards or community organizers can halt or stop zoning by withdrawing their participation in the process.
Okay. Well, it's true organizers can withdraw from the process or try to gum up the process, but very few do. I think that is a tactic that is underutilized, to use the term of land use term. It's underutilized, and it is really one of the few ways that these things can be stopped. Because once the steamroller starts...
How would it stop it? How would it stop it?
Well, that's what... Politics are influencing public policy. It's a political tactic. Disruption, demonstrations, lawsuits, they're all age-old tactics that can and should be used. What happens, though, with so many community boards is people are appointed to the community boards by the borough presidents. They're political appointees. They provide volunteer service. They have no training. And so very, very often, if you're on a community board, you're there to do the best you can, but you have to give up maybe 1 or 2 nights a month to go to a meeting and get it over with and do your duty. It's like serving. Community boards aren't activist organizations, and many activists join community boards and give up because they are so slow and plodding, and because it's very difficult within the process to make a real change. But New York City has a long history of the use of protest. I mean, it was protest and disruption that created the basis for the land use review process in the first place. Because before the land use review process, before the 1970s, it was everything had to be approved by the Board of Estimate, which is a single citywide body. There was no organism for neighborhood participation. But the grassroots protest was very vibrant. Perhaps because of that, because there was no sham like a community board standing in the middle saying, well, if you want to participate, you have to go to a public hearing, you have to behave, and you got 3 minutes, and say your piece, and then disappear. That's not how you influence public policy.
So, and we're going to moving on into like the zone of like what's going on in Empire Boulevard and CD9 specifically. There's this whole, what's become very kind of confusing to me, I guess, is this whole thing about how, like, participating in these community plans. Like, what is the relationship between, like, why is participating?
I'm just going to get a little water. Go ahead.
Why is participating in a community plan? And this is related to my earlier question about, like, this talk about like why the city needs participation, because you've essentially said they don't need it, but they clearly behave as though they do. And so like why it's needed, you sort of talked about it with lawsuits. Why it's needed and why withdrawing participation is a strategy to stop something. And specifically how these community plans, or studies, these various studies, and what the role of the study is. Oh, don't touch that.
Oh, sorry.
What the role of the study is in the process of the sort of like the scam of participation.
Okay, well, first on the basic principle, participation by itself is neither good nor bad. The question is who participates, who benefits, and what are the outcomes. So the city planning department uses the participation, public hearings that are required, for example, in the Uniform Land Use Review process, as a demonstration that they've fulfilled their obligation under the charter. And they have. They fulfilled their obligation. But that's not really participation. I call it participation without democracy. There's no dialogue. There's no exchange. People get up and testify for 3 minutes. The bell rings. They go sit down. No opportunity to talk to their elected officials. Very often, the elected officials aren't even in the room. They have aides talking on their cell phones or whatever. But this is really not genuine participation.